Welcome back to Dan's Masterclass, brought to you by Patrolapart. Now, we're starting a new series, and what better way to kick it off than right here, live at the Melbourne 4-wheel drive show. We're going to be taking a few parts off Liam's car this weekend, rebuilding them in front of a live audience, so Patrick can't edit out the bits, even if I want him to. Come along, join us for the ride, and enjoy the new series. Well, welcome to another episode, a live episode of Dan's Masterclass. Today, we're working on starter motors. Now, every car's got one, unless you're driving something from a very, very long time ago. One of them's working, one of them's not. So today we're going to go through what fails and how you can test them. And if you are stuck in the bush with a non-working starter motor, how you might be able to fix them. What would be the first call? Who's got anything? You're in the bush, you turn your key, and you might get a click, but no crank. First thoughts?
Dirty contacts.
Dirty contacts? Hit it with a hammer maybe? Anyone's heard that trick? Smack it with a stick? Yeah, well, we'll go through why that might get you out of trouble, or why it might not. So we'll start by, we'll start with a working starter motor. So this is the spare one that I carry in the back of my car. I carry a spare starter because it's an auto, and if the one that's in there doesn't work, we're in a bit of trouble. Now what we're going to use to test this, I've just got a battery down here and some jump leads. So just watch the starter here. Now this is what engages with your flywheel to actually crank your motor over. So you've got two things that are happening there. One, that little gear there that meshes with your flywheel is what they call throwing out, so it throws forward, and that's what engages it with the flywheel, and then it's cranking, so that's what rotates your motor over. Now, if either of those things aren't happening, your car's not going to start. So in one case, you might hit the key and hear like a grinding noise, or you might hear that basically similar noise to what you just heard then, but the car won't crank, and that means that it's not throwing forward. The other case is that you might just hear a click, so that's that it throws, but it doesn't crank. So there's two parts to that. You've got the coil on top here, which is responsible for throwing that gear out and then engaging the power to the motor, and the motor, which is obviously in charge of doing all the real work, cranking the car over. So we can test that as well. And how we do that is if you did that and nothing happened, then the next step is you can test whether it's the motor that's died or the coil. So if you want to feed just the motor, you go to the other terminal, which is connected straight to the motor. It's on the other side of that coil. Now this will create a bit of a spark because I'm directly feeding that. And that's not going to throw because the coil's not throwing out. But if your coil wasn't working, that way you can test if your motor is. So this is obviously a working starter. This one here is not. So if you didn't get either of those parts to work, we obviously can start looking inside the starter motor. So we'll start with the coil. Probably the most common failing point of one of these, especially if you're getting them in like water and dirt, and driving through bog holes, that sort of thing. Who's put their car in a bog hole and found the electronics not working afterwards? That guy's smiling, yeah. No one wants to admit it. Mud costs money. We take our little coil out. Alright. So, on the front of that, you've got the lever, which is actually responsible for pushing that gear out to mesh. And then you've got your coil. Now the spring is what returns that lever back once the coil's done its job. So if your starter cranks and then stays engaged, obviously your engine is at lower than idle speed when you crank it. And then once it fires up, it idles, obviously you get on the throttle, it revs up more. So the starter motor can't handle that sort of RPM. So as soon as it cranks, imagine you've held the key in, that's the sort of noise the starter's going to make if it stays engaged. So that spring is what pulls the starter back out. Now you can test the coils separately, and this is probably the part, if you ever hit a starter motor with a hammer, this is the part that you may or may not have fixed. And then we'll jump to the trigger wire, and from there we should see this coil pull in. It will pull that little tab in. Should being the active word. So that's not pulling in, which means that it's not throwing, nor is it cranking. Now, being honest, these in this day and age are really a replaceable part. If you have a failed starter motor, you're most likely just going to drive to your local shop and grab a new one, bolt it on. I mean, I changed one of these in a Macca's car park because I didn't want a Toby car, and it had stopped working. That was the week before I put the spare one in the car, coincidentally. It's more a thing of if you were in the bush, that'd probably be a different case, and I reckon I could have pulled this apart and at least got it working again to get you out of trouble. So you've basically just got two long bolts in the back of this. Take them out. see what's actually inside the motor. So rear cover will come off. Sometimes they want to come off with the whole body, as is this case. All right. Now what's the first thing we see in there? Corrosion. A heap of corrosion. So this got water in it. Through no fault of my own, I like to keep my car as clean on the underside as the top, and I think I might have shoved a pressure washer in this. So it didn't love it, and about a week later it stopped working. So the cause was corrosion, and to be honest, once it's at that point, the price of a starter, it's not really worth fixing. We can strip this down, we can keep going. You can pretty much see most of the workings from there. You've got your brushes on the front, which is probably the most wearing part of the motor itself. They're completely rusted out, basically no good. So that's why I swapped the two halves over and made one good spare starter out of them. So yeah, does anyone have any questions about testing that? How that worked, or how you can do it in your car? Has anyone changed the starter motor? This fella's done it, yeah. Tractors and all, yep, yeah, that's it. They're a pretty common failing part. I suppose the more times you crank your car, the more start and stop your work is, the more faster obviously going to wear out.
If you were going to replace one, would you recommend genuine or?
Yeah, yep, that's a good question. So the question was, for anyone that didn't hear it, would you replace it? If I was going to replace it, would you recommend genuine or not? I definitely would, based mostly on this experience. So the first time this failed was when I had the auto out of the car when I first got it. Starter motor failed, and I just needed something then and there, and the quickest thing I could find was a non-genuine one. So we chucked it in, and it worked for a bit. Next time it failed, as I said, that was a Macca's car park, and yeah, that was a non-genuine one again, because it was just, I need something, and that was the closest one. It's now got a genuine one in it, which that's what I was mentioning before. So the front of these, I mean, it's torn now because as I've had it apart a couple of times showing people and that, that's a gasket on the front half of that seals the coil from doing that essentially and filling the whole thing with water. The non-genuine ones, well, from anything that I've seen, the non-genuine ones don't have any seals. So especially with a four-wheel drive, might not be that much of a problem with a street car. You're obviously going to be exposing it to a lot more water and mud and all that sort of thing. So yeah, the genuine ones seem to be a lot better sealed. And as far as I can tell, the one that was on the car when I got it was a genuine one, and I think would have been what's on it from new, which is 380,000 Ks when I got it, and then the two non-genuine ones probably did about 10,000 and 10,000. So yeah, fairly decent comparison for you there.
Have you ever thought about buying other oils and buying replacement coils?
You can chase up replacement coils, as Paddy found with, what were you doing? The center diff lock. You can struggle to get people that, you can actually get things rewound. And it's probably a bit of a lost art form now, rewinding coils and rewinding motors and that sort of thing. It used to be really common, not so much anymore. I think it's just a thing of pricing of a non-genuine starter is pretty low. Yeah. Like I said, I just knocked this together because I wanted a spare before we did Fraser after it failing on me.
Or automatic is through.
Yeah, that's the thing. Who's got an auto? Whose car's auto? Yeah, a lot of people. So it's something to think about. Obviously, you know, if you're driving around here and your starter fails, well, it might be rough, but you'll get it towed or you'll get a mate to run you out one or whatever. If you're on Fraser or in the middle of the high country or something, it's obviously another story. You're looking at probably thousands for a recovery or a hell of a big favour for a mate to get your starter motor out. No one wants to put their hand up. Who smacked a starter motor with a hammer? Yeah, oh, see? There you go. Everyone's done it.
And it's got me out of trouble.
Yeah, me too. Smack it with a stick, smack it with a hammer, hit it with a brick, rock, you know. Everyone thinks you're a genius after you smash the starter with a rock. All right, so what you're actually doing there's a couple of things you can be doing. Is you're probably dealing with a similar case like this where it's got a bit of corrosion in it, that sort of thing. Two things, you could have a coil like this where the coil's stuck, and what you're doing when you hit it is basically, it does help if you can, and again, obviously make sure the car's not going to take off when you do it. Have a mate hold the key to crank and then tap it with something. You might free up the slide in this coil. So this one, as you can just see, it clicks in and out, but that's full of corrosion and full of water, and that would have been the reason that that's initially burnt out or stopped working. The other case is, again, the brushes in the front of here. so they can have a bit of crud or you know, water, rust or anything like that in them. They can stick back and not make contact, and when you tap on the body with a hammer, that's the other part that you can be freeing up or making work, and it will get you out of trouble a lot of the times. Now we can keep stripping this down. Is anyone interested in what's inside the back half of this motor? Have a look. There's a lot more corrosion. Yeah. All right, we'll keep going. If you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to just yell out or wave your arms, whatever.
Yeah, this is today's video. We don't have one today, so this is a live video you're watching.
Yeah, we're filming live. Apples or oranges? Oh, apples. I'm too lazy to peel things. Green. Yeah, unpopular opinion, green.
Sweet or sour?
That's sweet enough already.
Oh, yes, yeah, sour. Sweet enough already, there you go. Liam's onto it.
If you're gonna repaint your car, what color would you do it?
Oh, can I paint it red again? If I was going to repaint my car, what colour would I paint it? Red again. Yeah. So from there, that's the centre part of the motor. That's what actually rotates, and that's what cranks your car over. So as you can see, the water has truly gotten into that. Got a lot of corrosion in there. So that only sat, I reckon, from the time that I allegedly pressure washed it to the time I had problems with it was about a week. So not that long to sit to get that much corrosion in there. Obviously none of this is meant to have water in it, so none of it's designed to be waterproof.
How are the bearings in it?
Surprisingly good. But as I said, it hasn't really done a huge amount of work. So that fella just asked how the bearings were. They are a separately sealed bearing. So somehow they didn't get water in them, but just all the electronic parts did.
Would they rust out quickly because of the electrodes from the electricity all running through it?
Yeah, so the question was, would they rust out because of the electrodes running through it, or the current running through it? I'd say more so what you've got, because of your brushes, the brushes are carbon, and every time that motor rotates, you're essentially wearing slightly more of the brushes, and it makes this carbon dust, which ends up all the way through the motor. Now that, I think, would contribute. You get a bit of water in it, and that dust holds the water in around everything. Probably more so that. But yeah, everything in there is essentially, you've got carbon, you've got copper, and just raw steel. So none of it's meant to be waterproof or even water resistant. Like most of the electronics on your car, from the start, when you get water in it, you're going to start having problems. Similar to an alternator or anything like that. So yeah, I'd recommend keeping a genuine one if you can, or if not, at least a high quality replacement. And yeah, if you're running an auto, definitely carry a spare would be my advice. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about, and that's why I want to do these talks is if you were in the bush and you didn't have a spare, you could get this thing going again. So you'd clean up the brushes, you clean up the contacts around here, and you put it back together, get all the rust and corrosion you can out of it and the water out of it, obviously, and you would be able to get this going if you had to. Now, it might last a week, but you'll get yourself out of trouble. You'll be able to pick up a replacement, and then, yeah, you'll save yourself probably $4 to $6 grand on a tilt tray in the middle of the high country. Hope that's helpful next time you're out the bush and gets you out of trouble.
Thanks, Dan. Legend. Thanks, Dan.
Today we're doing a power steering pump. Now, the aim of these videos is going to be not so much maybe would you rebuild this at home, but if you're out in the bush and something's going wrong with your car, at least you'll know what's going wrong with your car, and you might be able to fix it, or at least get yourself somewhere you can fix it. So, we've got a power steering pump. As I said, this is one off the TD42. It's the same as the TV that's in my car, so pretty common part. And yeah, today we'll go through what's inside them, how they work, and I guess what the purpose of it is. So, who's driven a car without power steering for a start? Yep, so I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain to anyone what power steering does. Makes your life a lot easier. Earlier cars, a lot of them didn't have it, and the old strong arm steering is the name for it. So, as the name suggests, if your wheels are up against a gutter, you're probably going to feel it. So, the purpose of the power steering is makes everything a lot lighter. You know, you can turn the wheel with one hand. Now, the pump is what sits on the motor, and that supplies your hydraulic flow to your steering box. That's what makes your steering lighter. So let's get into how one of these things works. Now, bear in mind, I have done one of these in the past. would have been about 6 months ago on my patrol. So on top of this one, you've got a reservoir. Some of them are mounted separate, some of them are right on top of the pump, as is the case here. So the purpose of this is you can rebuild these at home. They're actually not that hard, they're not that complicated. The seal kits are available. Lamb ran down to the boys at Patrolapart and grabbed one of these the other day. Also managed to get his hands on a new pulley, which we'll get into later what the purpose of that is. Alright, so that's the reservoir off the top of the pump. Now all that does is hold your fluid for your power steering, so it loops back into this from the low pressure side of the steering box, goes out of this, straight into the top of the pump there. Pump makes it higher pressure and back out to the steering box. Rear cover, not a whole lot going on in there. Ports and that sort of thing, but there's no real seals. So this is one of the gaskets we'll be replacing, which is like a laminated rubber and metal gasket. And then what have you got inside one of these things? You might struggle to see at the back, but feel free to come up and have a look. These are basically, they're called a vane pump. So each one of those little metal tabs is called a vane. Now as this spins, it's off center. So as that center part spins, each one of those vanes flings out, runs against the outside of the housing, and as it extends out, it draws the oil out with it, and then as it's pushed back in, that creates your high pressure, forced out the ports on the back plate, and that's what flows out to your power steering box. Now, the sort of wear you'll see in these, in a perfect world, these would last forever. But in the world of GQ patrols where that gets full of mud, they don't last forever. So if Liam's lucky, this will all be in perfect condition.
Yeah.
We'll find out. So, careful when you drop these out. You will have a bit of steering fluid in there, and the vanes will all fall out. These are your vanes. So hard to believe, there's probably about 10 of these in there roughly, and each one of these is what's making your car's steering lighter. So you've got the front part of the housing, which is pretty much the same as the rear half there. Again, ports and that sort of thing. So what you're looking for in both of these halves really is where the edge of that vane runs against the face, you'll get a little bit of wear on that front face, and if it's had any grit or anything go through it, obviously it gets worse. So the better shape or better condition you can keep your power steering fluid in, the less chance of that happening, which is just down to regular servicing. So then from there, we'll move on to the front part. A little circlip in the front here. Now this would be where your pulley sits if you're looking at this steering box in your car. That's where your belt runs, on the pulley there. So right in the front you've got your front bearing, and behind that is the front shaft seal. Now those are probably the two most wearing parts in this whole system really, because that's the part that's, well, the bearing's going to take all the load of the belt running on it, and the seal behind it is really the only seal in here that's running full speed on the shaft the whole time. So obviously any time your engine's running, that seal is running. Now from there, this should pretty much pop out. Yeah, with a soft face hammer ring. Thank you. You've got your main shaft bearing, which, by the feel of that, needs replacing. If it feels like it's got sand in it, probably needs replacing. Now in the front of the housing, just behind the bearing, you've got your main seal. Now if your power steering pump is leaking, which on a GQ a lot of them are, that's probably the culprit right there. So, that's your little shaft seal there. Now as I was saying, that cops a lot of wear. Usually what you'll find is any sort of grit that your car's exposed to, so obviously the harsher you treat it, the quicker these parts will wear out. You've got a front seal there that is meant to keep the dust and dirt out, and then on the back side you've got your oil seal, and that's meant to keep the oil in, power steering fluid in this case. So once the dust gets past the dust seal, choose out the lid on the oil seal, and that's when the pump starts weeping. So, for a complicated thing, they're actually not that complicated. We've got a little workshop manual here if you can get your hands on one of them. They're pretty helpful. Something you can probably take apart in your shed. And then yeah, new seal kit, new front bearing, drive back together again. So, what do you reckon? Should we put it back together so he can drive out of here in a couple of days, or should we leave him with the old manual steering? Oh. We'll put it together.
I'm not strong enough to turn 35. So
he's put big wheels on. You can get all sorts of fancy bearing pullers for these, but we don't have one. We've got a vise and a hammer. So we're doing it the Aussie Arovos way. Now we'll put the nut on that so we don't damage the thread. And I would say this will come out pretty easy, but that's probably going to jinx myself. Using the fancy equipment, that's the bearing off the shaft. I feel that. What do you reckon?
Oh yeah. I can hear it. You know it's bad when you can hear it. That's sounds like one too many Talangi bog holes.
Yeah. Spend a bit of time in the mud.
Actually, you can pass that around.
Yeah, anyway.
Have a pass around, have a feel of it.
That's what your bearing shouldn't feel like.
Luckily, we have a shiny new one, which feels substantially better.
Oh, there you go. No more noise.
Now, to hold this, what I'm going to do is chuck that part in the vise and use that to tap the new bearing on. I was going to use the old bearing when it comes back.
Ah, the old bearing. I read that back.
Who's pocketed it?
Oh yes, cheers.
So, in tapping the new bearing on, I'm going to use the old bearing. Now, this just saves us from potentially hitting anywhere we don't want to hit. We'll be using, I reckon, a socket as Liam suggested, and a hammer to just knock this back on. Now once again, probably shouldn't say it, but this should go on pretty easy. You want to watch with these that you do get it started like pressing any bearing onto a shaft. You want to make sure it starts running parallel with the shaft. If you only hit one side of the bearing, it's going to bind and basically you'll never get it on. The more you hit it, the harder it'll get, and eventually you'll probably damage the shaft or the bearing. We do want to watch that we don't do that, which is hit the old bearing down too far and land it directly on top of the new one.
This is the part where Jan says, don't put that in the video.
Yeah. Edit that out, Patrick. Everyone just turn around for 5 minutes. Now, as you can see, the new bearing's home. It's up against the face. Sounds a lot nicer than the old one. And we're ready to start putting the rest of the pump back together. Make sure there's no dirt, crud, debris, general under four-wheel drive goodness that ends up in these things inside the pump before we start putting it back together. Take our new seal kit. In this little seal kit that Liam picked up from Patrolapart earlier in the week, we have every seal for this pump. Basically, we've got even a new spring washer for the nut when we put the new pulley back on. We've got a new shaft seal, got the new case gasket, as I mentioned earlier. There's all the O-rings to seal the reservoir back to the top of the pump. There's even O-rings to go on all the fittings. So everything's there to do this job, which makes it super handy. And yeah, we'll just chuck this new seal in the front. We'll start putting the pump back together. Now you can use rubber grease or Vaseline for this, or power steering fluid, bit of oil, anything really. I like to put something on these seals before you try and push them in, just helps them go in a bit easier. And you should always put something on the inside of the seal where that metal's going to run so that it doesn't, essentially, before you get steering fluid into it, it will burn the edge off the seal if it runs dry. And that's home. Take this with the new bearing on it, lubricate where the seal's going to run, that's ready to go straight into the housing. There'll be a little bit of pressure to get the bearing back into the housing, so you may have to tap that again. Shouldn't be anything too forceful, just like that. And you've got your circlip that goes on the front to hold that in. That's our new shaft seal, new shaft bearing. That's the two most easily wearing parts of the pump replaced. Now we're on the home straight. So, Liam has sourced a new pulley. Now the reasoning for this is, like myself, Liam's put you went with a GU steering setup on the hole, didn't you? So, he's got a GU steering box. Now the difference between a GQ and a GU steering box, there's a few differences. The GU boxes are generally stronger on the hole, similar to the late model GQ ones, but the early ones were a bit weaker. So by going to a GU steering box, you get a pretty solid upgrade. They're a lot stronger. The downside of that is that they require a little bit more power steering flow. Now, by going to a smaller pulley, you're essentially basically at idle or at any speed, you're making the power steering pump spin faster than it normally would. Yeah, it's like changing gears in a car pretty much. So yeah, smaller size pulley, different size belt. You get more flow out of your power steering pump, and that keeps up with the GU box. Now this is a TB45?
I think it's of a TB45.
Yeah, so we think it's of a TB45. So a GU pulley They use these same pumps in the GU, so essentially it's now a full GU steering setup. So that just goes straight on the spline on the front. You've got a new spring washer to replace the old one, and the nut that came off it. Put that on, cap back on. Liam's ready to put that back in his car. Shiny new.
Ah, thanks, Dan. Very good.
Thank you.
And for the last masterclass of the show, we are pulling off the freewheeling hub straight from Liam's Patrol to give this often overlooked part a freshen up.
And that's what engages, put the car in four-wheel drive essentially. So by pulling that back, you're disengaging the hub from the axle. Now with that in the free position, what we want to do is mark a line between this centre part and the outer of the housing. This part's a little bit noisy and it will seem quite archaic, I suppose. We just tap it like so on the bench. So basically just tap them until you get them out just enough to grab with the pliers, and they'll come straight out. So as you can see, that's a little dowel pin there, and that's what locks the outer part of the freewheeling hub to the actual drive part in the centre. And before you do this next part, just check that your marks are still there, which they are. You haven't worn them off, tapping that on that face. And then this centre will actually unscrew from the part you twist on the outside of the hub. So we'll grab that, and as you can see, it's the opposite of a normal bolt. Reverse thread. Yes. Wind it backwards, and that is now out. Alright, this is quite dirty, Liam, as expected. Now once that's all cleaned out, or relatively clean at least, you've basically just got one little spring clip, and that's what holds this this knob, I guess, into the centre of that. Yep. Now Nissan, in their wisdom, were nice enough to leave you with a little tag on one end of that. Just here, there's a little cut down edge. You can get a screwdriver just behind it. That pops out very easily. Now, with that out, basically thump that, and that's that disassembled. So that is the centre part that you actually rotate to engage four-wheel drive, and that is now the bare outer of the freewheeling hub. Now this is the reverse thread, as I said before, that I unscrewed the centre part of. That's actually, as you twist this hub, that's what engages the part that I showed you at the start. That's what engages this, pushes it as you rotate. Rotate one way, it engages it for four-wheel drive. Rotate the other, pulls it back. That's what disengages.
There you go. And it is crazy to think that, I suppose, all that drive and force to your front wheel is going just through that, essentially.
Yeah.
It's that one little component.
So think about that when you're lead footing it up, bouncing off rocks and that sort of thing. Every bit of all that power, no matter how tuned up and how dialed in your motor is going through that one little part.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going through this spline here, this spline, and those 6 little tiny pins that came out before.
Yeah, exactly.
And 6 bolts that hold it to the hub.
Yeah.
So not a huge amount really when you think about it. Now the part that really, I suppose, fails in these or leads to failure is this seal around the outside edge. So there's only one seal on the front face here, and that's what seals this piece that you rotate to the outer of the hub. So if you're going through water crossings or anything like that, that's where the water's going to get in. If you're going through dirt, mud, obviously the same thing. All that's going to end up in your hub. And I don't know if has anyone actually replaced one of these before or had problems with one? No?
I honestly, maybe it's a patrol thing, but you don't hear too many people having issues with these hubs, and they are quite sought after, and you will pay dearly even to get a second-hand one, no matter the condition.
Yes, yeah, they do go for quite a bit. And yeah, especially for genuine ones and that sort of thing. Yeah, so exactly. If you could rebuild a genuine one, you're doing a lot better.
What's the verdict? Does it look pretty grubby in there then?
Pretty nasty, yeah.
Is there any signs of water ingress or sand, dirt, anything? Or?
No, in that case it's pretty good, just old wheel bearing grease to be honest. Now this shares the grease with your wheel bearings, so you've basically got the bearing pack, the nut, your axle comes through the centre. There's a adapter that fits onto the spline of the axle, which adapts it to that spline you've got in there. On the outer end of the axle, that's held on with the circlip, and then you've got this on the outer, so there's no seals to separate it. So any dirt, again, that's going through that front seal or water or anything, it's going to make its way into your wheel bearings as well. So quite important, not only for four-wheel drive, but I suppose for the general safety of your car in that case.
Not much to it, is there?
No, there's not.
I suppose it is only a small component, but
it's a small component, and this is the thing with four-wheel drives. There's there's 1,000 small things that'll ruin your day.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a lot of little components that make up one, big moving kit.
Yeah.
And then he takes one of those components to end the day, as you say.
Yeah, you wouldn't, like if you were, in the middle of the bush and went to engage four-wheel drive, and this didn't engage, you wouldn't be going too far.
Yeah.
So we'll just drop that back in from the top. Lines are on the same side, that's all good. Probably a good time to start putting grease in it. So we'll just grease that, and that's just to keep out any water, moisture, condensation, basically stop it corroding and stop it seizing.
Yeah.
That just goes back in the back of the housing. I've put a bit of grease on that seal face already, so that's locked in nice and easy, doesn't catch. So that'll now locate between free and locked. Now the other thing you'll notice, for those that are keen on this sort of stuff, especially if you've looked into patrols in the past, this one rotates quite freely.
Is that a bad thing?
It's not great. So, GQ's had a problem earlier on, I believe it was. I can't tell you exact dates when this happened. These tend to drift, some of them. So if this gets a bit of wear in it, it'll just rotate on a corrugated road from locked to free.
Maybe I should have kept the sand in it to keep it nice and tight.
Now in the later models, what they did is they've drilled the side of this part of the housing. They put a couple little slots in it free and locked on the inner edge. They put a spring and a ball bearing in there. So as you rotate to either free or locked, that little ball bearing sort of latches and just gives it a little bit of resistance to come out of either way.
Ah, there you go. Maybe that's why I haven't been driving up all these tracks. Me freewheeling hubs are coming out.
Oh, it's the old hub trick again. Oh, I forgot to lock it in, mate.
Yeah.
Did that in two-wheel drive. Now, as you said, we were in free before, so we'll make sure we're there again. We'll flip this, so it's the same way up as it came out. Remember, it's a reverse thread, or you'll be there for quite a while trying to get it to start. Put a bit of grease on the inner side of that, and we'll put a bit on that threaded part in there as well. So now we rotate this basically all the way home, so it locks up against the front of the hub. We've still got it in the free position, and then we'll just rotate it back until our two lines line up. Now what that's basically doing is you're setting how far back that spline sits when you've got it in free position.
So does that affect the mesh of the gears essentially?
It does. So if you've got it back too far, when you go for four-wheel drive, it won't engage. And if you've got it out too far, when you go for free, it won't disengage.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a balance, and there's not a huge amount of clearance in it.
Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't want to be, sticking it in four-wheel drive and not knowing that you're only just hanging on the end of the threads, and then that's when you start breaking stuff.
That's when you damage stuff.
Exactly right.
So we'll line up those two little lines, and we'll just drop one of these pins in.
Oh, they slot in nice and easy, don't they?
They slot in perfect. So we'll just with one in there, or we'll put two in just for the sake of it. Then we can double check how much engagement we've got, and when we twist it to come to lock, as we twist, there's a little groove right on the edge of the hub there.
Oh, there is. Yeah.
Now that line is what lines up with the male part of the hub on the actual car itself, and so you want it to basically come out flush with that, so that when it extends, that spring pressure is holding it forward still. Right. If this spline wasn't lined up and I engaged it to four-wheel drive, that spring allows it to move back in or not extend out the whole way until the car rotates a bit and you engage. We'll drop the rest of these pins in, chuck a bit more grease on it, ready to go back on the car.
Do I need to clean the mating surface?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt, buddy. When you go to put these back on the car, they don't line up with any particular spot. As long as you get the bolt holes lined up, you're set. Onto the hub.
Can I get a volunteer to put their foot on the brake? Do you want a volunteer to put their foot on the brake? Now, these will have a torque spec.
Indeed they will.
57, I've been corrected, 57. 57. Then Dan's just going, I think Dan's elbow clicks at 57.
Yeah, no, it's elbow at 45, shoulder at 90.
Okay, right, so we'll just go somewhere in the middle.
I had it calibrated 2 weeks ago, so we should be right.
I'd actually be interested to see, who here torques their wheel nuts? Raise your hand. A few of you guys. A few people do. Good.
Yeah,
because it's the one thing holding you to the road is your tyre.
Yeah. Now maybe if you're on the side of the tracks or on the road anywhere, you've got the kit in the car, you've got to use what you're going to use. They're definitely a good idea, even if you think, well, the wheel's never going to come loose, like I'm a big bloke, I'll just lean on the bar.
Yeah.
That's great. Don't complain when your wheels start to snap off.
Exactly right. So,
or you're in the other case where you send it home with a big gun, you might not snap off the studs. next time you are trying to change your tyre and you've got the little bar this long that comes in the car, you'll be jumping on it to try and get the thing off.
Exactly right.
Before we put this wheel on the ground, we're going to engage to lock. Liam's going to do the other side for us. So, if I turn this wheel, I can see the drive shaft turn. I know that that is engaging with the axle, otherwise it wouldn't be happening. If he is in four-wheel drive and you've got those wheels off the ground, the other wheel's going to turn backwards. Now, if I disengage it in the same situation, we leave the other one locked in, disengage this one, drive shaft's not turning anymore. So in doing that, you've checked that when it's engaged, and when it's not, it's not. All right.
Very good. Does that mean we were successful in rebuilding the hub there?
Sure does, mate.
Oh, awesome. And maybe we might even be able to get someone to come and jump on the end of that
Who wants to
torque.
have a feel of what that torque setting actually feels like? Come on, someone wants the responsibility of doing Liam's wheel up.
Yeah.
This fella's going to do it. He held the brakes.
He wants to
the
be
torque.
responsible for the
He's
control.
rebuilt half the car. All right, mate. You torqued the wheel before? Good. All right, perfect. So, just like doing up the wheel like normal. Straight on nut, make sure it's seated. When you push this down, it's nice and steady, and you'll feel it click. Probably hear it click. There you go, Jay. That's it.
So how?
That's one.
Just
day.
one. And did you think that was like hard to do? Nah, not awesome.
Now I think the factory spec might be a touch lower than that.
Yeah.
133.
This bloke's the
He's our spec man.
He's the human
he's the workshop
patrol
man.
encyclopedia.
So from there, we'll flick the rest of them up, and we'll go into star pattern. Does anyone know what that means? When I say a star pattern. Alright, so we're going to cross, we're not going to do...
Oh, this is different if you got a 5-star. If you're a Land Cruiser person, you know.
Well, it's the same basic principle, mate.
Yeah.
Try and pick a wheel nut that's opposite the one you've just done up. So don't go around, if that's your hub, don't go around one to the next the whole way around. We'll do one here, one on the opposite side. Alright, that's that done. And that's that. Liam's ready to go.
I'm ready to go wheeling there.
That's it.
That's it, unreal.
Thanks, guys. Hope you learned something. Alright, so that's Liam's GQ all back together and ready to get out there and hit the tracks. Now if you guys enjoy this sort of content, we got a heap more coming your way. We're going to go through the ins and outs of how to keep your four-wheel drive on the road. So get subscribed, follow along, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.